The United States has quietly deployed over 100 agents on the ground inside Mexico, operating out of a network of 11 offices strategically located near border towns. From here, they lead killer capture missions against the worst cartel bosses. So why is it that we never hear about this? Because these aren't Special Forces soldiers, it's foreign-stationed American civilian agents from the DEA, FBI, and CIA. These covert missions are conducted with full approval and at the invitation of the Mexican government to work in partnership on their soil. These two countries are usually shy about their partnership because they don't want to bring too much attention to their binational security cooperation, but I dug up this DEA budget document that reveals over $400 million each year goes to fund some of these international operations. Just look at those bars and pie charts. That's why today I think it's important that we take a look at what these American agents are doing inside Mexico, how 2 CIA officers were nearly assassinated in broad daylight outside Mexico City, and how far America is willing to go to stop the cartels without even using the military. This video's partner is Supremacy World War III, an online PvP real-time grand strategy game that I started playing as a way to kill some downtime when I was stuck at the airport last month, and I found that it's actually an awesome way to unwind and de-stress. I like competing with 99 other players in real-time online, and it's persistent. The matches last over the course of a couple of weeks. I freaking love the maps, you guys. These remind me of the maps that we make here on our videos, so my strategy is I build up a crazy force of over 100 modern weapon systems, including tanks, jets, submarines, and then I create a few alliances and declare war on everybody freaking else. The research tree works better than real-life military acquisition because I'm able to research more than 250 different real units. It's free, no credit card is required, just click the link in the description. Try it out if you're looking for a fun way to kill some downtime anywhere, anytime. You guys get an exclusive starter pack with one free seasonal unit like the Elite Frigate that's worth $25 for the next 30 days. Try it out. Back to the episode. This is Arturo Beltran Leyva, also known as El Jefe de Jefes, or the boss of bosses, and this guy was trying to live up to his name by running drugs deep into the United States, murking dudes left and right, and leaving a trail of cocaine a mile wide in his wake, thinking he was fully immune. And he had reason to feel secure, because so far attempts to catch him had failed because he was protected by an army of bodyguards and corrupt cops. This is where the American DEA and CIA decided to get involved. A special US intelligence team was deployed on the ground inside Mexico and embedded alongside elite Mexican forces. They operated out of a forward deployed field outpost deep in cartel country. And in December 2009, US agents managed to track the cartel boss to a luxurious high-rise condo. They were able to triangulate the location from intercepted traffic from his BlackBerry. The thing that I think people often forget is the United States government has tools for killing and capturing cartel bosses without needing to deploy military assets across the border. Agents fed Mexican Marines live intelligence as they closed in. 200 Marines, 2 tanks, and helicopters surrounded the complex, blocking every exit. Inside were heavily armed sicarios with grenades and rifles. The Marines were ordered to go weapons-free on the enemy. As they breached the building, gunmen opened fire, grenades were tossed down the stairwells at them, and a 90-minute-long firefight broke out. 4 of the cartel hitmen were smoked in the exchange, and 1 Marine named Cordova was killed in action. That meant that the killer capture mission had just become a kill mission. His teammates saw red and went frickin' berserk and chased him into the bedroom. There, he made his Scarface-style last stand. The Marines reportedly pumped him full of bullets, then covered the dead Kingpin's body in blood-soaked dollar bills, mocking him, as if to say all the money in the world is meaningless if you're bullet-ridden. There was no flashy arrest, no trial, no extradition. It didn't require US Special Forces or cruise missiles. These were targeted strikes with partners who pulled the trigger. So who said diplomacy was boring? But the relationship took decades to make it functional. Neither side had a safe word to yell if one went too hard. But the partnership is not without its dangers. In 2012, 2 American CIA officers were on their way to a Mexican naval base for a meeting when they were ambushed by a hail of gunfire. The shocking attack happened in broad daylight on a highway only 40 miles south of Mexico City. 12 gunmen pumped 150 rounds into their vehicle. One of the CIA officers was shot and wounded in the leg, but both managed to survive purely because they lucked out that the enemy couldn't shoot for shit. They radioed for help and the Mexican Marines came and saved them. At first, it seemed like a rare cartel hit on US officers, but the truth was way more insane. The attackers turned out to be 12 Mexican federal police officers who were in civilian clothing and unmarked vehicles. They claimed that it was a case of mistaken identity, but that excuse smells like rotten fish taco, because the CIA officers were diplomatic plated in marked vehicles, and the federal police were oddly using unregistered weapons. All the Mexican police were arrested for coordinating with the cartel on this would-be assassination mission. But the takeaway was the incident revealed that the US intelligence had boots on the ground inside Mexico. And this time they weren't allied with the cartels. But wait a second, how is any of this even legal? How can American agents operate so deep inside another foreign country without breaking international law? For decades, the US has legally worked on the ground inside Mexico, and vice versa. It's a reciprocal, mutually beneficial relationship, because in theory, it all happens within the framework of what's called the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. These are a fancy, highfalutin set of rules that were agreed to in 1961 under international law governing how diplomatic conduct works. It was created to establish clear rules to everyone on how diplomats work in the Cold War era. Prior to this, shit was pretty buck wild, with political assassinations run rampant and diplomats getting arrested left and right, which would cause blowback and full-blown wars. So this treaty gave diplomatic immunity to foreign agents like the DEA and FBI. We can't agree on much, it seems like, but we can agree we don't want our diplomats getting parking tickets. But foreign agents typically cannot carry guns or directly arrest suspects, especially in Mexico soil, without being authorized. Agents are officially registered and cannot interfere in the internal affairs of the host state. I don't tell my neighbor Carl how to work his own barbecue in his home, even if he's burning the dogs. The DEA first opened up their foreign offices in Mexico City in 1973, and only 10 years later, they were already deeply involved in the most high-profile missions there. They partnered to target poppy and marijuana fields. They used aerial surveillance assets that Mexico didn't have access to. You guys, it was a big win-win. It's like my old squad leader used to always say, "If you rub my tummy, I'll tickle your chin." But then in 1985, that would change when 37-year-old DEA agent Enrique Kiki Camarena was sent to Mexico. He was investigating a massive cartel marijuana plantation called Rancho Buffalo. It was a gigantic 2,500 acre, or like 4 square miles long plantation for marijuana. It had its own irrigation systems, housing for workers, airstrips, and even armed security. Going within 10 miles of that place gave you a contact high. Kiki passed details of the hidden cartel operations from his on-the-ground informants to Mexican authorities. In turn, over 400 Mexican soldiers raided the ranch, destroying the entire crop, worth an estimated $22 billion today. But there was an unforeseen problem. Kiki had unknowingly triggered a political firestorm and gotten tangled up in an absolute clusterfuck. There was a secret alliance between drug traffickers and Mexico's own federal police and intelligence services. Testimony from 3 DEA agents said that the conspiracy ran even deeper, that the CIA was involved and attempted to cover up their association with the cartel. What was for sure is that Kiki had gotten in way over his head. Corrupt authorities betrayed the DEA agent, and alongside the cartel, they kidnapped him in broad daylight as he left the US consulate to meet his wife for lunch. They tortured him and his pilot for over 30 hours, then killed them and left their bodies in a shallow grave to be found a month later. This shattered the trust in the US-Mexico partnership up until then. The DEA saw this as a violation of that Vienna Act, which was supposed to protect legally identified foreign agents on Mexican soil. In response, the DEA went full berserk mode and launched Operation Leyenda, the first full-scale foreign homicide task force that operated in both Mexico and the United States. They went absolutely nuts. The DEA hired private bounty hunters to kidnap a Mexican citizen on foreign soil. The man they went to kidnap was Dr. Humberto Machien, who was a Guadalajara-based physician who was accused of injecting the American DEA agent with drugs to keep him conscious unconscious during that 30-hour torture session. He was kidnapped from his office in Mexico. They threw a bag over his head and exfiltrated him by private jet to El Paso, Texas, where he was arrested. Mexico called it a violation of their sovereignty, but the United States Supreme Court said that it was okay and gave it the green light. Operation Leyenda blurred the lines between a paramilitary and law enforcement mission. They raided over 100 locations across Mexico with the help of Mexican troops that they had vetted and trusted. This included DFS safe houses. The Mexican DFS, which is like their version of the CIA, was later disgraced and disbanded as a result of the revelations here, and relations reached a new low. It would have been easy for both countries to pull out after this, but shared interests kept them together. Mexico and the United States instead doubled down, they cleaned house, and they rewired the whole partnership from the ground up, because the alternative, doing nothing, meant that they would let the cartels win. Instead of trusting entire agencies in Mexico, the DEA then created what were called Sensitive Investigative Units, or SIUs. These were small groups of vetted Mexicans who were polygraphed, background checked, and trained firsthand by the DEA.
Same team.
These units answered directly to the DEA handlers and were more isolated from the broader corruption that faced Mexican institutions. The DEA expanded its on-the-ground footprint at this time in Mexico by gradually expanding their operations to a total of 11 official offices by the late 1990s. And these were strategically located in Mexican border cities for these cross-border investigations. In 2006, when Mexico launched their quote-unquote war on drugs, the DEA and FBI ramped up their footprint even more with their joint intelligence fusion centers. Their whole job was creating target packages where American analysts built out full profiles and tracked cartel leaders. We gave the locations and the Mexican troops did the knocking. An audit was recently released this year that detailed how FBI units operating in Mexico City were compromised by cartel hackers. The Sinaloa cartel successfully infiltrated Mexico City's surveillance network, breaching over 18,000 CCTV feeds. This allowed them to gain access to mobile phone data and track the movements of a US FBI assistant legal attaché, which gave them access to multiple undercover informants. Using this surveillance, they monitored FBI personnel that traveled between US embassies, safe houses, and meeting points that were all in Mexico's capital. The cartel hacker was able to see calls made and received by the FBI official and their geolocation data. According to the case agent, the cartel then used that information to kill sources and intimidate others.
And this wasn't your typical drive-by shooting in a dusty desert.
It was a 21st century digital assassination campaign. What made this so devastating, I think, is that at the time of the hack, the FBI legal attaché was embedded with Mexican federal forces. They were actively managing cartel investigations in real time. So American FBI agents in Mexico were riding alongside Mexican units to debrief cartel defectors face to face. So the cartel got this deep look inside the FBI's undercover operations in Mexico. It exposed their ability to stalk agents. And you might be surprised to learn that the FBI has been in Mexico City since 1940. Making it one of the oldest overseas legat posts, as they're called. By the 2010s, the DEA was once again deeply embedded in Mexico, but now the rules of the game had been better defined, and some level of trust had been restored. This is where US DEA Supervisory Special Agent Victor Vasquez comes in. He grew up in Mexico and was a former Marine. His fluency in Spanish and English, his close cultural ties to both sides of the border, and his military experience made him perfect for the kind of sensitive international mission he was about to be assigned. He's like Jason Bourne with a license to coordinate kill teams. In 2010, the DEA sent Agent Vasquez and Drew Hogan deployed to Mexico City on a covert mission to hunt El Chapo. Drew Hogan was a former Kansas deputy sheriff who had experience running undercover infiltrations. Drew headed up the intelligence operations side, working closely with Mexican authorities on the ground, and Agent Vasquez was embedded as the liaison with the actual hit teams. They started by going after El Chapo's lower level operatives. They tracked cartel burner phones.
I mean, Carl, you had one job. Get untraceable burner phones, homie.
But they were screwed before they even opened their mouths, because these supposedly untraceable prepaid phones were tracked by new American surveillance tech that used cell tower triangulation. The DEA's advanced wiretaps allowed the enforcement teams to capture El Chapo's higher-up lieutenants and then subsequently flip them as informants. But somehow, El Chapo continued escaping. Court testimony from Agent Vasquez reveals how they fixed this problem and just how much authority he had on the overall tactics. He said, quote, "We took the Mexican Federal Police out and only involved the Mexican Marines. Involving the police was not going to work because of the corruption level." He led a strike force of 100 Marines on a Black Hawk helicopter raid on suspected hideouts. He traveled alongside with them on these helicopters. But El Chapo was nowhere to be found. Agent Vasquez said that in Culiacan, you're going into the lion's den. You're going into the area of control of the most powerful cartel in the world. He was putting himself at considerable risk there, but he knew that they were closing in on the target. The joint team narrowed in El Chapo's location little by little, and Agent Vasquez chose the house to hit, and the Mexican Marines kicked in the doors and bagged the bodies. When they raided one suspected safe house, they breached the building. A firefight erupted, and the Marines killed 5 cartel gunmen and wounded 6 others. One Marine was injured in the chaos, but the intel that they pulled from the raid was absolute S-tier gold. They seized the phones that led them to follow a trail to a luxury condo in Mazatlan, where El Chapo was suspected of hiding out. Overhead, a constellation of American satellites tracked their location. In February 2014, Vasquez launched a pre-dawn raid alongside Mexican Marines called Operation Black Swan. He wore a body camera during the raid, and it revealed how closely embedded U.S. agents were on the ground. Footage shows the Marines breaching a reinforced steel door, taking nearly 10 minutes to gain entry. Inside, they found a bathtub that opened up through wiring, which revealed it was a hidden trap door that led to an escape tunnel. Vasquez helped secure the scene. He then gave a positive identification on the cartel boss, who was nearly unrecognizable, caught shirtless next to an AK-47. Vasquez later said in testimony, quote, "I even froze myself and I said, 'Holy shit, it is him.'" Then, when El Chapo escaped prison in Mexico, it was once again DEA agent Vasquez who was called on to help track him down. In 2016, Vasquez was on the scene where a platoon of Mexican Marines engaged in a brutal firefight that left a handful of sicarios dead, and El Chapo once again captured, this time extradited to the United States, where he's behind bars for life. This was a massive success, but if you notice something, the theme across all these stories is a lot of it is about nabbing criminals that were of interest to the United States, and these kind of violent overt raids rub some in Mexico the wrong way. In the 2020s, Mexico's President Obrador restricted the DEA's capabilities inside Mexico. He claimed the DEA were rogue agents that were violating Mexican sovereignty, and he even passed a law that prevented Mexican officials from speaking to the DEA without first informing the government. In 2022, the SIU system were disbanded, so those bilateral teams were crushed. That's why there's another American agency that in the last 5 years has stepped up to fill that gap and become possibly the leading cross-border investigative unit. You're probably familiar with ICE from their recent headlines in America for immigration raids and riots in Los Angeles, but you might not be aware that they also run a unit inside Mexico as part of what's called their Homeland Security Investigations Branch, or HSI, and they have more than 7,000 field agents. It's true, the DEA may have been the dominant US agency in Mexico throughout the 1980s and 90s, but today, it's surprisingly ICE's Homeland Security Investigations that's quietly becoming the real player on the ground. Why is that? I think because HSI isn't just chasing after drugs, it's chasing everything. Weapons, money laundering, cybercrime, human trafficking, and cross-border financial networks. That broader mission scope, combined with a reputation for sharing intelligence with Mexican authorities, even when it's not directly in US interests, has made HSI some would say a more trusted and strategically useful partner inside Mexico. They've worked hand in glove with top-level Mexican officials, like when they provided intelligence that led to the largest cocaine bust in Mexico City's history during now-President Sheinbaum's time as mayor there. This put them in a position to become the major three-letter agency in Mexico that almost no one knows about. And an incident in 2011 showed the dangers that they face every day. On a Tuesday afternoon in February 2011, two American ICE agents, Jamie Zapata, 32, and Victor Avila, 38, were driving south on Highway 57 in central Mexico. It's an isolated stretch of road between Monterrey and Mexico City. They were actually on a weapons interdiction mission, trying to stop weapons from being smuggled into the country. The agents were riding in a diplomatic-plated armored Chevrolet Suburban, and they were under official orders, but they were unescorted, which meant that they were navigating cartel-controlled territory with no armed escort. What neither of the agents knew was that the Los Zetas, one of the most feared and militarized cartels in Mexico, had been tracking and stalking them. At 2:30 p.m., two SUVs intercepted their armored vehicle and boxed them in. Armed men poured out, AK-47s were drawn on them. The agents rolled down their bullet-resistant windows slightly and shouted that they were authorized U.S. diplomats, but it didn't matter. The cartel gunmen fired at the window seams, spots that are known to be more vulnerable on armored vehicles. Agent Zapata was hit multiple times. His partner Oliva was wounded in the leg, but he managed to radio for help. The vehicle was shot with over 80 rounds. Jamie Zapata died before reaching the hospital. It was the first killing of a U.S. federal agent on Mexican soil since DEA agent Kiki in 1985, and it happened during a volatile geopolitical moment. Cartels were escalating their response to the crackdown against them. The brutal murder launched a bi-national manhunt. Over the next 6 years, 7 cartel members were extradited to the United States, including El Poleon, who was convicted of leading that hit team. By 2017, 2 of the attackers were sentenced to life in federal prison. Zapata's killing forced ICE to ban these kind of solo highway movements in Mexico, and they overhauled agent protection, and they changed how embedded operations were conducted, but it exposed a harsh truth. American agents in cartel territory aren't just investigators, they're targets. And I think this is the strange truth about the US-Mexico cartel war. It's not a full military campaign, and it's not a criminal investigation. It's something new, a hybrid of diplomacy, espionage, and street justice. It's not necessarily flashy, it's not always clean, but this partnership is one of the few things keeping the most dangerous criminals in our hemisphere from acting with impunity. For the full show notes and sources for this episode, you can go to cappyarmy.com, where you can also find a link for the merch to get this tactical progression t-shirt. We start as apes, and we work our way up to M1 Abrams. And remember guys, check out Supremacy World War III, the free-to-play online grand strategy game set in the modern global wars that we follow here. Personally, I'm all about building up my army, coming up with an Alexander the Great style strategy. Click my link in the description for an exclusive starter pack today.